Hi. So I had a request to do a video in a respirator talking about any topic. I didn't want to talk about just anything. I was planning to do a video on this topic, and I thought I might as well do it in a respirator, try to get the message across. So I've done other videos about existential threats, such as the still ongoing pandemic. Of course, the climate emergency. People tend to ignore and downplay existential threats for whatever reason. But I want to talk about an insidious existential threat that underpins everything else. It's normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is a psychological phenomenon, a cognitive bias that causes people to underestimate the possibility of disaster and to overestimate their ability to survive and deal with it. It's basically living in the "this is fine" memes. So people are in denial, they're delusional, they expect that everything will just stay as it is. They don't want to believe that bad things can happen, and even when they do, they kind of stay in denial and pretend it's not happening or that it's not that bad. So apparently 80% of people in an emergency or in a disaster suffer from normalcy bias. They will just pretend it's not happening. They'll think everything's going to be fine. It's this belief that everything will return to normal. So even if something happens, they just don't think it's going to be that bad. Also, a lot of people, they don't trust their own instincts. They look for cues from others. What's everyone else doing? If everyone else seems calm, I guess things must be okay. So apparently in a lot of disasters, there are a lot of people that will just mill about. They'll wait for further instruction. Like in 9/11, I mean, some people ran down the stairs and got out of the building, but other people were still on their computers. They're waiting around, waiting for more information. A lot of people will just follow the crowd, even to their doom. So people seem to worry more about what others will think and worry more about fitting in than their own survival, which is crazy, but that's the world now. So the problem with normalcy bias, because it's 80% of the population that suffer from this, that's the majority. And people think that what the majority is doing is the right thing. So if you're an alarmist, if you acknowledge reality and the risks and threats that are out there, then people think that you're the crazy one because they're not worrying. But the thing is that you're right. Like the people that are cautious, it's right to be cautious. So the problem with normalcy bias, it's such an insidious threat because it makes everything else worse. If you deny that a disaster is happening, then you're not going to act. You're not going to react. You won't do anything about it. And there have been cases like the Titanic, for example. So they hit an iceberg and it's obviously a disaster. It's an emergency. They need to get off the ship. The ship is sinking. But because a lot of people just didn't believe it was possible that the Titanic could sink, they didn't want to believe it. So the early lifeboats were only half full because people didn't want to get in them. Oh no, I'll stay on the ship. I don't want to get into a rowboat out in the cold. I'll just stay on the ship. And by the time they figure out that, oh no, this really is sinking, it's too late. And then there wasn't enough lifeboats for the people that were left. In 9/11, like a lot of people, they stayed at their desk, they stayed on their computer, and they waited for further instruction, and they took cues from other people instead of just getting out. Now, in the movies, they always make it seem like people panic and they run screaming. But in real life, a lot of people don't know how to react. Part of it is you might be in shock when something happens. It's like you can't believe that this is actually happening. So you might be in shock. It's like your survival instincts, fight, flight, or freeze, okay? So fight. If there's a threat that you can possibly fight off, you do that. If not, you flee, the flight instinct. But there's also freeze. There's like the deer in the headlights. You don't know what to do, you just kind of freeze. Now, depending what the risk is, if it's a tiger or bear or something that's after you, you know, maybe our ancestors, maybe the freeze instinct would help you in some situations. If you're not moving, maybe the predator will leave you alone. But if it's like a ship sinking or a hurricane or tornado, then obviously freezing is not going to help you. Now, the problem with normalcy bias is that because people have this belief that everything's going to be fine no matter what, they don't take warnings seriously. So even if you try to warn them, like they know ahead of time if there's going to be a flood, a hurricane, and some people refuse to evacuate. They think, oh no, I'll ride it out. It's going to be fine. They think they're going to be okay. I remember there was a joke that a priest told in church, and I've heard it many times. There's a guy that believes in God, and he believes God's going to save him no matter what. So then there's a hurricane, waters are rising. No, he's not going to evacuate. He ignores the warnings. He stays home. Well, then the water keeps rising. So a boat comes by and offers to save him. Oh no, I'm fine. God will save me. Well, then the water keeps rising, so he winds up having to go onto his roof, and then a helicopter comes by, and he waves it away. No, God will save me. So then the water rises, he drowns, he gets to heaven, and he says to God, why didn't you save me? And God was like, well, I sent boats and helicopters, what else can I do? The problem is, God can't save you from your own stupidity. You have to heed warnings. You don't take unnecessary risks. You have to pay attention to your surroundings, and if there is a disaster, you have to act. Now, the problem is that when you're stressed out, sometimes your brain, it takes a while to process information, and when you're stressed, you might not be able to do that. So it's always good to have plans in place, to be prepared, have emergency preparedness, so that you know the drill, and that if something does happen, you have a plan in place, so you don't even have to think. You can just act. Because at the time, you'll be too frazzled. You might not be able to think of what to do. Now, a perfect example is fire drills. Now, I remember as a kid, we had a lot of fire drills. It seemed to me it was at least once a month, if not once a week. And it was kind of fun because you'd get out of class, the drill would go out, and you'd all have to file outside, single file, and walk outside. And that was supposed to prepare you if there was a real fire. The problem with it was we did it so often that it became routine, and we became complacent. So that then when a fire alarm would go off, people weren't taking it seriously. They were, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to get a drink. Like, they weren't going outside. And what if it wasn't a drill? What if it was a real fire? And this is part of the problem. People can become desensitized. It's like they're not worrying about anything anymore. And they're able to normalize things that should not be normalized. The genocide in Gaza, the war that's never ending in Ukraine, the rise of authoritarianism in the US. There are all these horrible things that are happening, not to mention all the violence and the accidents and the terrible things happening all the time that people downplay, and they won't even connect the dots that it's COVID and brain damage that's causing it. So many things that people are just willing to overlook and to downplay and minimize, and it shouldn't be this way. We tend to not worry about things if they don't affect us personally or if they're in the future. So people worry about the here and now. It's like you worry about what is, not what if. But our actions right now affect the future. The climate emergency, we've known about climate change for decades, and yet it keeps getting worse. And even when we have signs like wildfires and floods and natural disasters, people still aren't willing to make the changes, and leaders aren't willing to make the changes because it's basically political suicide to try to save the world. So everyone just pretends things are going to be fine and ignores it. The pandemic is still ongoing, but the majority of people just pretend it's over. They were so eager to get back to so-called normal that they were willing to abandon all mitigations. And now they pathologize and attack people that are still taking precautions It's crazy. It shouldn't be this way. So a lot of people live in denial. It's an illusion. It's a delusion. They have this false sense of security. The normalcy bias can also be called the ostrich effect, basically burying your head in the sand, pretending it's not happening. It's also been called negative panic. So instead of panicking, people are just complacent, like they don't care, literally like the "this is fine" meme. The thing is, if you deal with so much ongoing tragedy, you do sort of become desensitized. And unless it personally affects you, people think, oh, well, that's the other side of the world. Oh, that's someone else. I don't have to worry about that yet. But one day it's going to come to your door, and what do you do then? So with my PTSD and anxiety, hypervigilance is my default setting. So I'm very aware of potential threats. I can't ignore them. I can't deny them. That's not in my nature. But people act as though, I'm the crazy one because I'm worrying. They don't worry about anything. And the problem with the pandemic is everyone's pretending that it's over, and even doctors dropped masking. And people think, oh, well, if he's not worrying, he's not masking, then I don't need to. So it's really scary because people seem to worry more about fitting in and more about conforming than they do about their own survival. Anyway, there are a lot of things that I was going to talk about, but I didn't want this to be too long. And anyways, thanks for listening. Take care. Stay safe.